Hey everyone, I'm Dave, and today we're going to count down every coaster at Cedar Point in Sandusky, Ohio, from the worst coaster to the best coaster, in my opinion, of course. So make sure you comment down below, let me know if your opinion differs from mine and in what way. But we're going to start this off. There's now 16 coasters at this park. There used to be more, but they've taken some out recently, so we will not include those in our ranking. Wicked Twister, for example. That wasn't actually a very good coaster anyways, but that one's gone, as well as Top Thrill Dragster is currently gone. I have been to Cedar Point 2 times, and both times Top Thrill Dragster was closed anyways because it was notoriously unreliable. So even though I went all the way out there multiple times, I never got to ride it, so I have no idea if that's good or not. I imagine it is. They're gonna reopen it, I think, next year with some new elements, so maybe we'll go out there and try it and redo this video then. So let's get into it. Let's start ranking these coasters at Cedar Point. And we're going to start at the bottom, and at the bottom is a coaster I've never ridden, so I can't really rank it. It's a Wild Mouse called Wild Mouse. And again, I put it at the bottom. It's not really included in the ranking. It looks kind of fun. It looks pretty typical. I noticed the cars do spin around, which not all Wild Mouses have that, so that would probably add a little bit more fun than a normal Wild Mouse, but generally they don't rank that high for me. This one was built in 2023, literally this year it opened. Zamperla built it. It has a top speed of 35 miles an hour, a height of 52 feet in the air, so it's not very high, it's not very fast. I'm sure it's fine, but it doesn't make our ranking. It would probably beat some of these lower ranked ones if we did ride it. Nonetheless, we did not ride it, so we're not going to include it. Let's move right into the rides that I have ridden, which we will start with number 15, Wilderness Run. This is the worst coaster in the park. In my opinion, it's a kiddie coaster. I rode it with I think my 6-year-old at the time. Bringing a 6-year-old to Cedar Point is not always the best if you like coasters, because they can't ride much, and a lot of the lines are long, so you end up, having to split up as a family line. Anyways, that's a whole separate video. But Wilderness Run is an Intamin coaster built in 1979. Top speed, guys, get ready for this, 6 miles an hour with the height of 19 feet. So this is straight up a kiddie coaster. It lasts 50 seconds. You're on it, you're off it, and sometimes you have to wait in a long line. I don't recommend it unless you have a really young one who you want to take on a coaster. And if you do, they might like it. I don't think they'll get scared. That much I'll say. Okay, so let's start to move into some more serious coasters at Cedar Point. That'd be my number 14, Woodstock Express. Now, Cedar Fair uses the Woodstock Express name at a lot of parks for a lot of different coasters. For this one, it's like a junior coaster with a train situation. It has some helixes. It goes 42 feet up in the air. It's 1 minute and 6 seconds long. Top speed of 28 miles an hour. Built in 1999 by Vekoma, and it is okay. I would say the best thing about it is probably the train. Literally, it's a train on a track, and if your kid likes trains, and this will really make them happy. My son loved trains when he was very young, and he would have ridden this coaster and loved it because he'd feel like he was on a choo-choo train. So I do think this has some charm to it. It's not completely devoid of thrills. The helix is a little thrilling, especially for a young one. So this coaster does beat out Wilderness Run, but it's certainly not anything crazy that I would wait in a long line to go on. And that's why it's at number 14. A lot of coasters to get through though, so let's go right into number 13. The 13th best coaster at Cedar Point is Corkscrew. This is my opinion. This coaster is a custom looping coaster from Arrow. It was opened in 1976, and it goes 48 miles an hour, so it's fairly fast. Lasts 2 minutes, 85 feet high. I think really the star of the show is the inversions. It's got these inversions right after each other that make it look like, you guessed it, a corkscrew. And it's a pretty cool element. It's unique in that I haven't done it very much, but it's also not that good of an element. It's one of those things that, for marketing's sake, when they released it back in 1976, I'm sure it got a lot of people to the park. But for actual re-rideability and stuff, it's not that exciting. It's kind of bleh. And it's a very old coaster, and it's gotten a little rough over the years, so it shakes you around a bit. So Corkscrew, while neat and fun, and I would say you should experience it, it's pretty low on my list because it's rough and not that exciting. Okay, let's move right into number 12. We're not going to stay on number 13 very long, and a lot of people might swap these two. Number 12 for me is Cedar Creek Mine Ride. This is a typical mine train from Arrow. Came out in 1969. Only goes 42 miles an hour, but it lasts a long time. I think it's the longest coaster at the park at 2 minutes and 42 seconds. And I just have a soft spot in my heart for these mine trains where they're not thrilling really at all. Maybe they'll have some helixes or some small drops that are kind of thrilling, but in general, they're not that thrilling. They're just fun because of their simplicity, and it feels like you're taking a trip back in time. Oh, this is what coasters were in yesteryear. That's kind of how you feel. It fits the theming of the area. It only goes up 48 feet, but it's like you're on a almost 55-year-old coaster, and it's just a cool experience to get on it. So while it's not amazing, it is a cool addition to the park, and that's why it's number 12 for me at Cedar Point. My number 11 coaster at Cedar Point is Ruguru. Ruguru is a floorless coaster. It used to be a stand-up coaster, very similar to Vortex at Carowinds in North and South Carolina. I don't really love stand-up coasters, so I'm glad that they turned this into a floorless. They took out that weird crotch seat and created real seats, and you just basically sit on it like any normal coaster. This is a B&M coaster built in 1996, again, as a standing coaster. It goes 60 miles an hour, 2 minutes and 40 seconds, 145 feet in the air, 4 inversions, so it's a moderately intense and exciting ride, but fortunately, and I know I talk about this a lot, but comfort's a big thing for me on coasters. It's uncomfortable. It's a headbanger. You know, my wife. So I bring my wife to parks with me, and this one she can't ride because it bangs her head so much. And she has this issue where if she gets her head banged a lot on a coaster, she will get a migraine, and the migraine can last like a full day. So we have to be very careful. So a lot of times, me and the kids will pre-ride a ride and say, "Hey, Tina, you can ride this or you can't." And on this one, we all rode it. We all ended up with headaches, and we said, "You definitely cannot ride this coaster." So while it's got a lot of good elements, I don't really recommend it. It is definitely more fun than every other one we've mentioned so far, but it is going to probably give you a neck or a headache, by the time you're done. Maybe your experience was different. Okay, let me know in the comments below. I only rode it a few times. Maybe it's not always like that. Maybe there's a certain part of the train that's better than where I rode, but it did give us all headaches. And we rode near the back each time. Okay, let's move on to the 10th best coaster at Cedar Point. The 10th best coaster is Iron Dragon, which is a suspended coaster. It's super unique, and it's becoming a rare breed. There's really not many of these left. Big Bad Wolf was one at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. I never got to ride that one. Aerodynamics, 1987 is when it was built. It goes 40 miles an hour, lasts 2 minutes, 76 feet is the max height, and no inversion. So this is it's number 10 on my list because, well, first of all, it doesn't bang you around, doesn't give you a headache, anything like that. Second of all, it's got some thrilling moments where you're like, ooh, because the whole entire cart will swing left and right as you go. And there's some really cool moments of that. And then finally, its uniqueness, I think, gives it a few extra points to make it beat out things like Ruguru. Because there's a lot of head-banging floorless coasters out there like Ruguru. So, it's a little lower on the list. You're hardly going to get this anywhere else, and it's a unique experience, so I do think that lets it rank at number 10 for me. It does get a long line, though, because the operations are kind of slow, but I do like this one. I think you should try it. It's a really fun coaster. Iron Dragon's my number 10. Okay, let's move right along to the 9th best coaster at Cedar Point, which is going to be Raptor. Now, Raptor is an inverted coaster from B&M from 1994. It goes 57 miles an hour, lasts 2 minutes and 16 seconds, and has a max height of 137 feet. And the crazy thing about this coaster is it does 6 inversions, 6 flips. And that is why it's number 9, because it's super crazy, fun, thrilling. It's got all of those things going for it. But it can't rank higher than 9 because pretty much anytime you do 6 inversions, especially big looping inversions like this ride has, there's a good chance you're going to get stomach sick. And I remember my first ride on this, we roll up, we're next to board, and we see a person getting off the coaster throw up all over the back seat in front of them, and that is because this is slightly nauseating. And when I rode it, sure enough, as I got off, I was like, oh, I could feel my breakfast up near the top of my lungs. These big loops on Raptor can be a little nauseating. Super fun, but a lot of times after you ride it, you feel a little bit nauseous, and that is why it's my number 9, not my number 8 or any higher. But it is a very cool coaster. It's great when you walk into the park. It's beautiful. I love the green color. The seats are pretty comfortable. I didn't have any issues. I didn't bang my head around a lot or anything like that. So it rides well. It's just a little nauseating. So it is my number 9. Raptor at Cedar Point. Okay, let's go to number 8. Number 8 for me is Gemini. This is a wood dueling coaster. You can ride 2 different sides of the tracks. They try to start them at the same time, and you're kind of racing to get to the end. And it's fun. It was built in 1978 by Arrow. Goes 60 miles an hour, 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Goes up to 125 feet. This was not a coaster that blew my mind as far as wooden coasters. I've ridden better wooden coasters, but the dueling element where you're racing against them, we did actually go at the same time, and you're waving at each other as you go by. People are trying to high five, which I think seems dangerous. I don't think I ever saw them succeed, but they're trying to high five each other and stuff. So there's a really fun community element to this coaster, and it's not crazy intense. There's some intense moments, not crazy intense. Pretty much anyone could ride it, I would say. And it's even not that rough for a coaster that's that old. So this is a really fun coaster. The line isn't even that long usually. So I would definitely recommend this. That is why it's beaten out so many of the other coasters and hit number 8. And while it's not the greatest wooden coaster in the world, it is super fun. You should definitely try it out. Moving on to number 7, which is technically more of a kiddie coaster. It's a wooden coaster as well. It is Blue Streak. It's from the Philadelphia Toboggan Coasters Company, who also made Woodstock Express at Carowinds, which ranks really highly for me as far as Woodies go. And yes, they're called Woodies, guys. Childish humor in the comments last time. Now, Blue Streak was built in 1964. It goes 40 miles an hour. It's 1 minute and 45 seconds long, and it goes up 78 feet in the air. But I remember the whole time, I felt like I was going to fly out of my seat. Like, I got out of that coaster. My kids, too, they're like, Dad, I almost flew out. And listen, I know that can be a scary feeling, but they're running this coaster daily, hundreds of times a day. No one's falling out, right? So they know that they're not going to fall out. People aren't going to fall out because of G-forces and science. I don't know why, but they know I'm not going to fall out, so I trust them. And just that experience of like feeling like you're flying out of the coaster is super fun, that air time, especially an old wooden coaster. Sometimes they have seatbelts, sometimes they don't. I honestly can't remember if this had a seatbelt or not, but I remember us all feeling like we were going to fly out of it and it leaving an impression in that sense. So love that coaster. Rode it several times in one day, and I would love to ride it again. Blue Streak, number 7. All right, let's move on to number 6, which is Val Raven. Val Raven is a dive coaster from B&M, built in 2016, goes 75 miles an hour. It's 223 feet up in the air, so it's high up, and it's got 3 inversions. The thing about dive coasters is what they do is they'll take you to the edge. You kind of like start to fall, and you look down like you're being suspended over the drop, and then after like a brief couple second delay, maybe 5 seconds, 10 seconds, it drops you, and it's a really thrilling and exciting moment, that first drop. For me, though, with dive coasters, when that's over, I'm kind of like, all right, is it done now? Like, it's not that, there's not much else to it. But that thrill is so good that it gets it to number 6 for me. And I've rode several dive coasters. I think I like Val Raven better than I like Griffin at Busch Gardens. But, I think everyone's got their own opinion on that. I think they're all good in their own way. And you can kind of choose which you like better based on the certain elements and things like that. These coasters are super fun. They're scary at first, but then once you get used to them, they're not bad. And usually they'll do a second little overhang thing that's not as intense later in the ride, and it's just a great ride. Honestly, I rode it several times. If you haven't ridden a dive coaster, you totally should try Val Raven, number 6 at Cedar Point. The number 5 best coaster at Cedar Point is Magnum XL 200. This is an amazing coaster. It's a hyper coaster, which means 200-foot drop, brought to you by Aerodynamics, built in 1989, the first ever hyper coaster to be built, and it goes 72 miles an hour. It lasts 2 minutes, and I absolutely love this coaster. The reason I love it primarily is the location. It's got this really excellent location at Cedar Point where you're riding out into the Great Lake, into the water there. It's not an ocean, it's a Great Lake, but you feel like you're riding out into the Great Lake. It's got amazing views of the beach, things like that. It's got these tunnels that you go through that have lighting and fog packages, and they're just really thrilling. And even though it's old, it's still like super good. And it doesn't have a very long line. I think we rode it like 6 times in 2 days. That's how much we liked this ride. And the line had something to do with that, but it's just fun. It's a fun ride. It still rides great all these years later. And Magnum XL 200 is definitely firmly in number 5. Almost got number 4, but number 4 went to Gatekeeper. Gatekeeper is a really great ride at Cedar Point. It kind of, well, as you may expect by the name, keeps the gate, right? It's right at the opening gate in the entrance to Cedar Point. You kind of walk under it to go into the park, and it's a wing coaster, so you feel like you're really far away from the track. You're kind of out on the edges, and it's a super epic coaster. It's from B&M. It was built in 2013. It goes 67 miles an hour. It's long. It lasts 2.5 minutes or a little more, and it's 170 feet in the air. It actually flips 6 times, but somehow it manages to flip 6 times without making you nauseous at all. Like, I didn't get like motion sickness or anything on this ride. It didn't bang your head around. It's comfortable. This is really, as far as a wing coaster, a stellar wing coaster. I can't recommend it highly enough. It's really fun, really enjoyable, and I can't wait to get on it again. And it just adds so much to the entrance of the park as far as the view and what you see when you walk in. It really sets the expectation for an awesome day at Cedar Point. All right, guys, time for our top 3. My third favorite coaster at Cedar Point has got to be Millennium Force. I don't know why. Maybe it's the nostalgia of it, but it's the first ever Giga Coaster 300-foot drop coaster. It was built by Intamin in the year 2000, and it was just revolutionary when it came out. It goes 93 miles an hour, which is insane. And you can feel that speed when you're riding it. Now, another coaster this may remind you of is Fury 325, which is 325 feet. It's at Carowinds, and it goes 95 miles an hour. This is not as good as Fury 325. That's why it's number 3, not number 1. If Fury 325 was in this park, would it be my number 1 in the park? I don't know. I'd have to think about that, but maybe. It might be. I really love Fury 325. Even though this isn't as good as Fury 325, like the ending isn't as good, but the first drop is just amazing. It's a little rough. It's getting a little rough as it gets older. It's 23 years old now, but it is just such a stellar coaster. You get amazing views while you're on it of the park. It kind of feels like you go everywhere on this ride. 2.5 minutes long, and it's just pure fun, unadulterated fun. It's not even that intense, right? Like, my daughter was 9 when we rode this, and she loved it, wasn't scared of it at all. So it's accessible too to younger kids, and it's just a great ride. So that Millennium Force, number 3, third best coaster in the park. And now this is where it gets controversial. There's 2 coasters left, and almost everyone will put these 2 at the top, but not everyone will put them in this order. I might be weird, but for me, my number 2 coaster at Cedar Point is Steel Vengeance. Steel Vengeance is a hybrid Rocky Mountain construction coaster built in 2018. It goes 74 miles an hour. 2.5 minute duration, 205 feet high, and 4 inversions. And this is on the iBox track, so it's kind of a combination of a wooden coaster and a steel coaster, and it's amazing. It's super fast, super intense, and it does all these crazy turns where you go through the structure, and it's an incredible ride, A lot of people will say this is their favorite coaster in the entire world. It is not for me. It's just not. For me, I mean, I went with my son and my wife. They were both old enough. Well, obviously my wife was old enough to ride it, but my son was tall enough to ride it as well. And for him and her, for my wife and my son, this was their favorite coaster at the park. For me, it wasn't my favorite. For me, it's got these really intense inversions where it kind of throws you out and it hurts your thighs a little bit for some reason. And it also is so intense, and this is a weird thing to complain about, that you feel like you don't have time to catch your breath. You're racing through and you're turning and you're tilting and you're flipping and you're doing all this stuff. There's no moment to just go and enjoy, like, I don't know, just enjoy that you're there. It's just like, holy crap, holy crap, holy crap, holy crap, and it's over. And that, for me, like, it just was too intense, and so it was number 2 for me at the park. An incredible ride. Absolutely loved it, but it couldn't beat out Maverick for me. My number 1 ride at Cedar Point is Maverick. Maverick's from Intamin. It's a launch coaster. I love my launch coasters. This has 2 launches. It goes from 0 to 70 miles an hour in 3 seconds, guys, and it feels crazy. And then it stays low to the ground and kind of tilts and turns around these corners. It feels like you're driving a race car or something. It's just such an incredible experience. 2.5 minutes long. It's got 2 inversions, but those 2 launches are what it's all about, and I love the way it kind of hugs these walls and things, and this ride was so good when I rode it, and I remember getting off it and just being like, oh my gosh, this is the best ride at the park. And this ride, for me, like, okay, so similar ride in Florida where I live now would be Velocicoaster. Maverick versus Velocicoaster, I don't know. I have to get back on Maverick and try it again. I haven't ridden it in a couple years. I think I would still like Maverick better than Velocicoaster because it stays closer to the ground and feels more speedy, whereas Velocicoaster does like a lot. I don't know. It's really hard to say. I don't know which one I'd like better. I'm going to have to do a comparison. I'm going to go back to Cedar Point. Cancel all my plans. I'm going back to Cedar Point. I have to compare Maverick to Velocicoaster. But Maverick is incredible. And I know a lot of people will disagree in the comments. Feel free down below and say that Steel Vengeance is better. I'm totally fine with that opinion. But for me, Maverick blew me away. When I got off that coaster, I could not stop talking about it for like an hour. And as you can see from some of the footage I'm putting in here, it's just incredible. Guys, this is my rankings all the way from the bottom to the top of Cedar Point and the coasters there. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up. Check out some of my other ranking videos, some of my family vlogs at the parks, and we'll see you next time.